Why don't we have unlimited energy? It seems like we should have the technology by now to do whatever we want, and in some ways we do, but most of the world is still powered by steam. That's energy in the modern world, different ways to boil water. It sounds kind of stupid, but energy needs to be converted into a compatible format so that we can plug our phones into it. So what role does renewable energy play in the future? I'm actually Christine, and here's how it works. Renewable energy is energy derived from natural resources that are constantly being replenished, things like sunlight and wind. Fossil fuels, on the other hand, are finite because they take millions of years to make. This is why renewable energy is so appealing. Utility companies across the world have different designs, but 80% of them are built around steam. This is thermal power. It's the conversion of mechanical or chemical energy into electrical energy. We use things like coal, natural gas, or even nuclear power to heat water. That steam powers a turbine which pushes a series of blades to rotate the shaft in a generator, which usually spins magnets near coils to create an electrical current in what's called electromagnetic induction. Steam is actually a pretty good idea because the water is reusable. It can transition from liquid to gas over and over. However, either these facilities emit a lot of pollutants because they're burning fossil fuels, or they are using renewables, but they're not super efficient or capable of transmitting energy across long distances. So the question is, how do we find the most effective method to boil water? Or do we go around it? And then how do we build a grid that can handle our growing thirst for power? Thomas Edison opened the first plant in New York in 1882, but it wasn't until the 1950s that it really started to expand. After World War II and the economic boom, the need for electricity in households exploded. People had refrigerators, heaters, air conditioners. The demand was so great that the country essentially had to expand the power grid to fuel all this new technology. And they did, but it wasn't without issues. For starters, there isn't one large national grid in the United States, but rather three of them: the East, the West, and Texas. Texas made the move to avoid crossing state lines so that they wouldn't have to face federal regulation. I foresee no problem with this plan. The highway system may have been overseen by the federal government, but our electrical system was assembled by thousands of independent companies in different places over the course of decades. There is no single entity in charge. There are federal agencies that play a role, like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which regulates the transmission across state lines. But their authority is limited. They have no control over the rates we pay or the construction of certain power plants and their transmission lines. Second, the grid was designed with burning in mind, like coal or gas and later nuclear. They didn't see the big picture at the time, which brings us to the third issue: travel. Transmission lines are not very efficient, and it's not clear who controls what since different companies manage different areas. This is important because if we switch to solar energy, for example, not everywhere is going to be sunny all of the time. The cloudy areas will need energy to be transported to them, sometimes over hundreds of miles. Lastly, we consume far more energy than the 1950s could have ever anticipated, nearly doubling in the last 10 years alone from AI, cloud computing, and crypto mining. The grid is getting bogged down by our growing demand, and AI is especially sucking it dry. Tech giants are aware of the problem, and that's why most of them are looking for other energy solutions to fuel their AI so that they don't have to turn the platforms off. When the grid was originally being assembled, the assumption was, rightfully so, people will update this and replace the equipment once it gets too old, but that didn't happen. Much of the same equipment is still being used past its life expectancy, which is around 40 to 50 years at best. A report from the North American Electrical Reliability Corporation indicated that our aging infrastructure contributed to over 25% of major disturbances. It can lead to power outages or even forest fires, as California is starting to realize. Energy is a building block of civilization, and it keeps us alive. Not only do hospitals need it, but cold regions in the winter and hot regions in the summer. So what are our options? If you love learning like I do and going down the rabbit hole to find new fun facts, then today's sponsor Brilliant is for you. I've been using this app for years and absolutely love it. Not only does it keep my math skills fresh, but I can learn new things I never thought about, like what shapes bridges are built with or how are stars categorized. Most of us lose interest in learning after graduation because we're pretty burned out from it. It's estimated that up to a third of students never read a book after graduation. But learning doesn't have to be like that. Brilliant is a great way to keep your mind fresh, and now it can be in subjects that you actually enjoy, like quantum mechanics or how to go viral on social media. Brilliant really knows how to communicate information to people who don't know anything about the subject by starting from the ground up to people with an extensive background already. I love exploring the new topics and puzzles. Even 10 minutes a day can make a difference, and it's right on your phone. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, click the link in the description for a free 30-day trial and 20% off an annual subscription. Renewable energy comes in a few different forms, the most popular being solar, wind, and hydropower. But there is also geothermal, which is using the heat from inside the earth and is popular in Iceland. There's also wave energy, which is becoming popular in Portugal and the UK. You might have expected me to say nuclear power, but there are two kinds, fusion and fission. Fission is what power plants are currently doing, but it's not considered renewable because it still needs fuel, usually uranium, which has to be mined. Fusion would be different because it's the power of the sun, so it would be self-sustaining. But we haven't figured out how to do that yet. If you want to dive into it, I have a video on nuclear fusion you should check out. Regardless of how you feel about fossil fuels, they won't last forever. They're made from ancient organic matter like plants and animals, and can come in a few different forms like coal, petroleum, natural gas, and oil. Which one of them you get depends on the type of fossil it's made of, the temperature it cooked in, and the pressure. It began millions of years ago in warm, shallow bodies of water. Organic materials like algae and plankton would die and sink to the bottom. There they got mixed with inorganic material, creating a very rich mud. This mud can only form in still water and cannot be exposed to oxygen. If it makes it a few kilometers into the Earth's crust, the pressure increases and it heats up from the Earth's internal temperatures. If those temperatures are between 90 and 160 degrees Celsius, it creates oil and natural gas. Hotter than 160, and it's just gas. Land plants primarily produce coal, and ocean things produce oil and natural gas, all of which takes millions of years. While each fuel source may have a slightly different composition, they are all mostly hydrogen and carbon, which is energy from sunlight that's been trapped. And that high proportion of carbon is why it burns so good. The other useful thing about fossil fuels is they travel well. You can throw a lump of coal into your backpack and it will still be a lump of coal when you get home. The same can't be said for wind. How we turn that lump of coal into fuel is we burn it. Compared to nuclear fusion, it's super basic. We're just trying to figure out how to make steam and use that to move things for us. Wind turbines are also pretty cut and dry. The blades are directly moving the shaft and powering the generator. So instead of boiling water to create steam that moves the blades, the wind outside is just doing it. For hydropower, it's water that pushes the turbine. So instead of wind making the blades rotate, now it's water. What they all share in common is that they power a turbine. Solar panels, however, skip that step, which is one of the things that makes them interesting. Sunlight is made of photons. When they travel from the sun to Earth and hit our solar panels, those photons interact with the electrons in the panel, and that creates an electrical current, meaning we don't need to power a turbine. We already have the electrical energy. One of the barriers with renewable energy is that it still needs to be stored. Say you have 2 days of sunshine, but then a day of clouds, or you want power at night. Storage is critical for those low light situations. You would want energy that can be built up during peak times and then left to the side for later use. The grid wasn't designed to store energy, it was designed to send it off into pipelines and cables to be used right away. And why wouldn't it? Coal and oil can just sit in barrels. You don't have to burn it until you need it. Batteries have gotten better, but there are issues, especially for the lithium ion we lean toward. For one scale, we would need so many batteries and so much lithium that we are nowhere near that demand. Lithium can only be found in a few places and it's hard to mine. Not to mention, mining is just generally terrible on the environment. There are companies working on some alternative ideas, like using gravity. They use renewable energy to push the concrete blocks up, and then when there's a need for electricity, they drop the blocks. There are also plans to use salt in unique ways and rusted iron. Basically, people are working on it, but it's not enough yet. If you're wondering what the technological utopian future looks like, it's nuclear fusion. Everyone wants it to work. It is literally the power of stars. Fission is great, but it can have meltdowns, long-term waste, and it still needs fuel to be mined from somewhere. Renewable is also great, but you couldn't power a rocket ship with solar panels. As far as we know, this is the next step. The only method that has the power we need to be some future advanced civilization. Nothing else even holds a candle to fusion. To be clear, we do have fusion to an extent, but it is incredibly difficult to pull off. It's like forcing two magnets of the same charge together. The reason why it's able to happen at all in the universe and literally fuel our existence is because of the sun's immense high pressure and temperatures that essentially manhandles hydrogen together. To create fusion, we need to recreate the sun's extreme environment on Earth, a mini sun here on Earth. If that ever happens, in many cases, fusion plants could just replace the fission plants we already have because they too would be creating steam. The power of the sun to boil a pot of water. So what's the holdup? Well, fusion is taking too much money and outside energy to run. And if it's not cost effective and it needs fossil fuels anyway, what's the point? So while it is the ideal scenario, it's not within reach as much as solar and wind is right now. Renewables are a great support system. The more options we have, the more places we can turn when one of them doesn't work. Which is why no one is suggesting all solar or all wind. Ideally, we have a mixture of all those things. Renewables would also lessen the dependency on other nations. When wars and conflicts sprout up and they jack up the prices, nations with their own energy sources won't be as vulnerable. Like Europe. They were importing 45% of their natural gas from Russia, but after the war in Ukraine started, they decided to end their dependency by the year 2030. Whether or not we turn to renewables, fusion, or stick with fossil fuels, one thing remains the same. If we do not fix the national grid, replace the aging equipment, and update the technology, nothing is improving anytime soon.